This is a follow-up to episode 1. Each metaphor or idea that my co-host and I discuss will then be followed up by one of these shorter, slower, more intimate episodes where I try to outline just one thing that you might expect from therapy in relation to the subject from the previous episode. So see it as a kind of a B-side. Last episode, Katie and I talked about shame and about how we can own those darker parts of ourselves. We talked about sticking a flag in who we are in order to bring our whole selves to relationships. This episode is also about shame, and it's about the fear and the truth that sits behind the shame. It's also a window into how a therapist might see that shame and maybe work with you. I'd like to start by saying that when we reveal something true and vulnerable about ourselves, when we do stick a flag in some aspects of ourselves, we have little trust sometimes in what responses we might receive. The possible responses fall into one of 3 categories as far as I can see. We might be met with open arms and warm acceptance. We might get a neutral response, or we might sometimes choose to tell somebody who can't quite hold it, and we get a hostile or a negative response. And I would like to start this episode by saying that in my experience, most people are met with the former, with acceptance and open arms. But that's not always the case, and I feel that episode 1 spoke to that outcome quite well. So what I'd like to do today is speak a little bit more to that third option, the third outcome, where people might not be able to handle what it is that we're saying. So when Brené Brown says, as Katie mentioned in episode 1, find people who can bear the weight of your story, I think she's saying that if we trust our internal alarm systems, that we can make an informed decision as to how a certain person might receive our information. And so we could choose to only tell people the things that we believe they can handle. But of course that requires us to be honest, to not be led by fear, because our fear might well tell us that nobody can bear the weight of our story. I'm here to tell you that somebody can. I'd like you to think about a time when somebody shared something deeply vulnerable about themselves with you. Did you shun them, or did you find their honesty beautiful? Did you feel more connected to them as a result? And this is all we talked about in episode 1. So, like I say, let's move on. Because if the worst should happen, and the person that you tell cannot handle what it is that you tell them, then I'd like to speak to that eventuality in a little bit more detail. It's certainly the more challenging outcomes. And let me be clear that I'm not talking here about significant trauma. If you fear talking about your trauma would reopen a wound and potentially re-traumatise you, then tread very, very carefully and seek the support of a professional to be with you while you do it. Take a moment to think about what your shame is. What is the thing you think you can't share with people? And I'm going to put a deliberate pause in here now, just for a moment, while you think about the thing or things in your life that you think people could not handle. I can't possibly share that. People will shun me. People will humiliate me. People will leave me. So that truth that you've just thought of, that truth which you fear can't be shared, I want to ask you what it is that you're frightened of. What is it that's so terrifying about sharing that? Do you fear that nothing's going to be the same again, that by telling that person or those people how you really feel, that you will change everything? Do you fear that nothing will be the same again, that by telling that person or those people how you really feel, that you will change everything? Because there is a chance that you might be right. What if, once you draw attention to it, that it is going to change everything? And so maybe we need to ask ourselves, is it the thing itself I fear, or is it the change that I fear is going to come? And let me take those 2 one at a time. So if you fear the thing itself, the truth you have, the thing that it is that you can't share, then all you're going to achieve by hiding it is that you'll have relationships with people who don't know this thing about you. Your relationships will require you to forever hide this thing about yourself. And while you're working hard to hide this something, you're not able to relate fully, and people can't know you as you really are, and they won't be able to love it, because actually that's what happens a lot of the time, is people do love it. Because even in telling our truth, even if we're not accepted, and it's a rare occurrence that we are shunned because of our truths, then it's not that the truth itself is wrong. It's not that you are wrong. It's that the person you told it to can't yet understand. Maybe the person you told it to is as afraid of it as you had been before. And I think this is the difficult bit. Sticking a flag in who you are and being met with fear in the form of negativity could change us so utterly, could send us so far backwards, and we fear it might change the landscape of our lives so drastically that we don't know how we're going to find a way through. And this is what brings me then to the second thing that you might fear, which is that it's going to change everything. If it's fear of the change, then I'd like you to invite the possibility into your mind that you could survive that. What we can't survive is inauthenticity. We can survive the truth. And if the person that we are telling cannot hold our truth, then what will ensue is a new era where you know more. Knowing that person's limitations means you can know the limitations of that relationship, and you can then grow around that new information. The message I'm trying to convey here isn't to imagine that we can stick a flag in who we are and that everything will remain the same. The trick is to know that we can survive it. To know that the other side of the ruins lies a land that is more real, suits us more, feels more like home. So even if you do lose everything, you will find the capacity to rebuild. If your life falls apart, when you bring your whole self to it, then the life you are living might not be right for you. And so to therapy. A good therapist will see your fear. A good therapist will want to know it as intimately as you do. They'll be able to empathise with all the parts of you which are pulling you in different directions, and they will understand your behaviours and your desires, and they'll be able to say, of course you think like that, of course you chose that path, or did that thing. It's okay, I understand. And then they will say, and this, I suppose, is where the challenge comes, so how can we now help you to remove the things that are in the way of you living a more full life, a life that suits you better? And the key word in that is the word you. Because all the therapist wants, just like all your good friend wants, is for you to find your path. A therapist will be able to understand your fear and help you accept it. To nurture the part of you that learned that fear in the first place. They'll take you back to a time in your life when you learned that fear, so you can see how inevitable it was that you grew around it to protect yourself in the way that you did. And in accepting this about ourselves, we become less controlled by it. So I hope that sheds a little more light on how therapy might help in these kinds of situations. I look forward to being with you next time.